Welcome to the Text-to-Speech Guidance webinar. I am Karen Davies, the Accessibility Specialist at the Indiana Department of Education. This webinar was created to provide updates regarding the guidance released to schools on text-to-speech and human reader for all items in English language arts. Our goal is to help you understand the guidance to prepare for the upcoming testing administration for the 2020-2021 school year. Any questions related to this webinar can be directed to the IDOE staff on this slide. IDOE updated the 2020-2021 Accessibility and Accommodations Guidance to provide new information in regards to the text-to-speech human reader accommodations. Guidance was released to school corporations to assist case conference committees and 504 teams when making decisions if a student should have all items read aloud, including items measuring reading comprehension by text-to-speech for the online assessment or a human reader for the paper assessment. The questions should be answered by the student's teacher and the student as well. The case conference committee or 504 team should consider the provided answers as well as other diagnostic information when making decisions if a student should have the read aloud accommodation for all English language arts items for iLearn in grades 3 through 8 and iStep Plus. The boxes that are shaded are all in the yes column, and selection of these boxes indicate the need for the text-to-speech or human reader accommodation for reading comprehension. There should be more than 1 or 2 marks in the yes shaded boxes for students to receive the accommodation in grades 3 through 12 for English language arts reading passages. Schools must continue to support literacy practices for reading as part of daily instruction. Now we're going to go through questions 1 through 8 of the text-to-speech guidance. Question 1, does the student have an identified reading disability or health issue that affects the student's decoding, fluency, or comprehension skills? Having a reading disability means that there is strong evidence of the persistence of the disability, despite intensive targeted instruction. There should be documentation of the interventions used and the formative assessment data on the effect of each intervention. Documentation of a reading-based disability should have been documented in kindergarten through 2nd grades and reflected in such difficulties as difficulty learning letters or letter sounds, difficulty in learning sight words, and difficulty in phoneme blending. This data, as well as student work examples, should be reviewed by the case conference committee or 504 teams to consider the access effects of the use of the accommodation. The text-to-speech human reader accommodation is meant to provide access to the text, not make up for being a slow reader. Question 2. Have interventions been used over time, such as several years, to improve the student's decoding, fluency, or comprehension skills? If so, what approaches have been used to strengthen the student's decoding, fluency, or comprehension skills? Documentation of the approaches that have been used to strengthen the student's decoding, fluency, or comprehension skills. Documentation should include specific dates with progress monitoring data and interventions implemented. Documentation includes continuous, intensive interventions that have not been successful in improving student decoding, fluency, or comprehension performance. Question 3. Does the student use text-to-speech or receive a read-aloud accommodation during instruction? Students with significant disability-related barriers to accessing text usually have demonstrated these barriers over an extended period. As a result, for instructional purposes, they've used text-to-speech or read-aloud accommodations during instruction to access text. They may have a membership in an organization such as Bookshare or regularly use assistive technology software to provide access to text. If the student has not been provided these types of accommodations during instruction, they should not be provided during the assessment. Question 4, does the student use text-to-speech or receive the read-aloud accommodation during formative assessments? Students that use text-to-speech or a human reader during formative assessments indicate the need to continue utilizing the accommodation on state assessments as well. Question 5, does someone such as a teacher, paraprofessional, another student, or parent regularly read aloud to the student in school? A possible supporting indicator of the need for text-to-speech or the read-aloud accommodation is that the student typically is read to instead of the student reading to himself or herself. This indicator should be used with caution. It should not be just because students with disabilities are typically provided text-to-speech or read-aloud accommodation. Instead, it should be that someone reads aloud to the student rather than the student reading for himself or herself, because it has been determined that the student will lack access to important information due to significant barriers to decoding, fluency, or comprehension. There is a risk that some students who are regularly read aloud to in school may not have had appropriate access to high-quality reading instruction. This needs to be ruled out when using read aloud in school as a supporting indicator. Further instruction should always strive to increase the student's independent reading. Question 6. Is the student recently blind, or does the student have a significant visual impairment? If so, is the student learning to read Braille? A student that is learning to read Braille should be assessed with the Braille assessment to get an accurate measure of their reading comprehension skills. If a student has not yet learned Braille, it is appropriate that they have access to text-to-speech or a human reader for all items, including reading comprehension. Question 7. Is the student an English learner? An English learner is a student who is learning how to read while he or she is learning English. It is important to obtain an accurate measure of his or her decoding and skills in English as the student learns the language, which may take several years. Being an English learner is not a sole reason to receive text-to-speech or read-aloud accommodation for reading passages. If the student learning English also has a reading-based disability as defined in question 1 or is blind, then the considerations for those disabilities would apply. Only students with an IEP or 504 accommodation plan are eligible to receive the text-to-speech or read-aloud accommodation. Question 8. Does the student have other needs that might be accommodated by the provision of the text-to-speech or read-aloud accommodation? Schools should use student data on the effect of using text-to-speech or a human reader during classroom instruction, formative assessments, and classroom assessments. They can make data comparisons of using the accommodation text-to-speech or human reader versus not using the accommodation to determine if using it for all items, including reading comprehension, is appropriate. When developing an IEP, the Case Conference Committee must determine the special education and related services that will meet the unique needs of the student, regardless of the student's identified disability. The IEP must also include a statement regarding any individual appropriate accommodations necessary to measure the academic achievement and functional performance of the student. Keeping in mind that appropriate accommodations for the state assessment programs are set forth in the program manual issued each year by the DOE and referenced earlier in this presentation, and accommodations that don't invalidate scores. IIEP was updated to add the new accommodations on December 17th. Schools that have already held annual case conferences can reconvene if they determine a student needs to have the accommodation text-to-speech or a human reader for the paper assessment only, based on the text-to-speech human reader guidance document. As a reminder, after the annual Case Conference Committee meeting, changes to the IEP may be made by the case conference committee at a case conference committee meeting or without a case conference committee meeting if the parent and public agency agree not to convene a case conference committee meeting, and to collaboratively develop a written document to amend or modify the student's current IEP. Accommodations for instruction and on state assessments must be determined by the case conference committee and 504 teams. If an accommodation is not allowed on the state assessment, it must be discussed with the parent guardian during the case conference or 504 meeting. Schools must provide a copy of the notice for statewide assessments to parents and guardians at the annual case review. The contents of the notice must be discussed with the case conference committee or 504 team. The notice does not exclude school corporations from the 95% participation rate for accountability purposes. This brings us to the end of the 2020-2021 Text-to-Speech Guidance webinar. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, comments, or feedback you may have using the emails provided. Thank you for participating and have a wonderful day.